Good afternoon. Just a couple of programming notes for all of you. Tomorrow there'll be a briefing at 12 by Niels Hilmer, the German State Secretary in the Federal Ministry of Defense, Katharina Stasch, Germany's Director General for International Order and Disarmament in the Federal Foreign Office, and Jean-Pierre Lacroix, who, as you all know, is our Undersecretary General for Peace Operations. They will be here to discuss with you the UN Peacekeeping Ministerial Summit taking place in Berlin on May 13th and 14th. At 2 p.m., there will be a briefing by the permanent mission of the plurinational state of Bolivia on Bolivia's proposals to address the global crisis from the perspective of indigenous people. And at 3 p.m., there will be a briefing sponsored by the permanent mission of Canada on the Chilcot Nation calls for action to address toxic drug crisis in Canada. And I will try to squeeze in between all of those interesting briefings. This morning, as you well know, and as you saw, the Secretary General, along with President Lula da Silva of Brazil, convened a virtual leaders session on climate and just transition. After the meeting, the Secretary General spoke to some of you and said that he had heard a unifying message. Our world faces a massive headwinds and a multitude of crises, but we cannot allow climate commitments to be blown off course, he said. Mr. Guterres added that we must keep building momentum for action at COP30 in Brazil, and that today was an important part of that effort. The Secretary General also said that renewables are the economic opportunities of the century. Dissenters and fossil fuel interests may try to stand in the way, but the world is moving forward full speed ahead. The Secretary General also urged leaders to take action on two fronts. First, to step up efforts to submit the strongest possible national climate plans well ahead of COP30, and second, to scale up support for developing countries. His full remarks in the video are all available on the internet. Our Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, is traveling to Washington, D.C. this afternoon to attend the World Bank IMF annual spring meetings, and she will also engage in discussions with key stakeholders and government officials attending those meetings. Ms. Mohammed will participate in a ministerial roundtable to discuss the upcoming 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, which will be held in Seville in Spain this summer. And she will also address priority actions to support the Sustainable Development Goals. Ms. Mohammed will separately meet with finance ministers, leaders of international financial institutions, and multilateral development banks to discuss the challenging global economic context, its implications for sustainable development, and how to mitigate the risks for the world's poorest people. She will return to New York tomorrow evening. Turning to the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, notably in Gaza, our humanitarian colleagues report that hostilities are continuing unabated across the Gaza Strip, with Israeli airstrikes reportedly hitting tents and areas sheltering displaced families. At the same time, supplies into Gaza continue to be blocked by the Israeli authorities, and that has gone on for more than 7 weeks. And it also further deprives people of the means for survival, and it undermines every aspect of civilian life. Yesterday in Khan Yunis, our colleagues from the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs carried out an assessment at 2 locations in Al-Mawasi that were hit by Israeli strikes on Sunday and Monday, reportedly killing 8 people and injuring more than a dozen, most of those children. Among the injured is a 4-year-old boy who lost both of his legs. The team said nearly 20 families lost shelters and belongings. Yesterday in the Mawasi area of Khan Yunis, OCHA team visited another 2 sites that are hosting nearly 2,500 displaced people, including many who fled after the latest displacement orders on Al-Qara in Khan Yunis. The team noted acute shortages of food, water, medicine, and shelter. Civilians that are traumatized have no access to mental health support. Both communities that were visited rely entirely on once daily hot meals from community kitchens, which are insufficient, and those kitchens frequently run out of food to distribute. Children are going hungry, with reports of injuries during food distribution due to overcrowding and competition to try to get whatever food is available. OCHA says canned food distributions, cash assistance, water shortage, and emergency health support and temporary learning spaces are urgently required. The presence of injured civilians, as well as people with disabilities and chronic illnesses, underscores the vulnerability of the people who are at those sites. Throughout Gaza, food supplies are running dangerously low, and malnutrition is rapidly worsening. Last week, one partner screened 1,300 children in North Gaza and identified more than 80 cases of acute malnutrition, a twofold increase from previous weeks. Our partners working in nutrition also report severe supply shortages due to aid blockade and the challenges of moving essential items into and within the Gaza Strip. Access to key storage facilities such as UNICEF warehouses in Rafah remain heavily constrained. And on a positive note, 2 days ago, a truck carrying nutrition support successfully moved from northern to southern Gaza. The shipment can support approximately 470 children for about 1 month, and it will be crucial in preventing their current conditions from getting even worse. Across Gaza, living conditions are appalling, as one can imagine. More than half of the population relies on inadequate or non-existent sanitation, while over 75% report exposures to sewage, open waste, and rodent infestations. The public health risks are grave, especially for vulnerable groups, particularly malnourished children under 5, who are highly susceptible to waterborne diseases and infections. As part of the ongoing efforts to respond to growing environmental and public health risks, UNRWA says its sanitation teams are responding with spraying disinfectants, cleaning campaigns, and hygiene awareness sessions to reduce these risks and support displaced families. And we, of course, call on member states with any influence to press for an immediate end to the blocking of humanitarian aid going into Gaza. We urge them to ensure that once again supplies are let in and can be distributed wherever people need them, with full respect for humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. We also urge member states with influence to do whatever they can to push for the release of the hostages. Turning to the situation in Yemen, I can tell you that we remain deeply concerned over the impact of ongoing airstrikes on civilians and the infrastructure they rely, including health facilities. Since the noon briefing on Monday, more than 24 airstrikes have been reported. In Al-Hodeidah city, our humanitarian partners are stepping up emergency support to meet the rising needs related to the strikes. We also remain deeply concerned about ongoing missiles and drone attacks conducted by the Houthis against Israel and in the Red Sea, and we call on the Houthis to cease such attacks immediately, reiterating that Security Council Resolution 2768 related to Houthi attacks against merchant and commercial vessels must be fully respected. Meanwhile, we continue to receive updates on the devastating effects of the air attacks in Houthi-controlled territories in recent days. We verified 5 child casualties due to airstrikes in Sana'a on Sunday. Strikes on the 17th of April damaged a hospital in Al-Baida Governorate, where humanitarian partners were running an emergency obstetric and newborn care program. Damage to solar panels at the hospital mean it can no longer operate around the clock. We reiterate once again a call for all parties to the conflict to uphold international humanitarian law. We and our humanitarian partners are continuing to stay and to deliver wherever we can, but even as funding allows. This year's humanitarian needs and response plan for Yemen is currently just 8% funded, with less than $205 million received out of the nearly $2.5 billion that are required. The reality is that we cannot do more with less money. The people of Yemen are caught in a horrific cycle of violence and a humanitarian crisis. Although funding is no substitute for the political solution that people of Yemen so desperately deserve, it can and will help communities at least survive and stabilize. Moving to Sudan, I have an update on our colleague Ramtam Lamamra, who, as you know, is the Secretary General's personal envoy for Sudan. He is in Port Sudan currently. Today he met with General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan of the Sudanese Armed Forces, as well as other senior officials. Mr. Lamamra is intensifying his consultations and continuing his engagements with the parties and all relevant stakeholders to explore modalities to strengthen the protection of civilians and any effort to de-escalate the ongoing conflict. In his engagements, Mr. Lamamra will reaffirm our call for urgent and genuine dialogue between the parties to the conflict towards an immediate cessation of hostilities. In addition to that, we renew our call for an inclusive political process to prevent further escalation, to protect civilians, and to put Sudan back on track towards a peace and stability, or at least a path towards peace and stability. We urge the parties to seize the opportunity of the visit of Mr. Lamamra in the country and the region to commit to engaging on an inclusive way forward and on enhancing the protection of civilians, including possibly through proximity talks. And on the humanitarian front, just to give you a clearer picture of the horrific situation, and a situation of which we remain gravely concerned, especially about the mass displacement, the civilian casualties, and the dire humanitarian needs in Al Fasher, in Tawila, and other parts of North Darfur state. In those areas, civilians have sought safety and shelter after the takeover of Zamzam camp by the Rapid Support Forces, with all the violence that we saw as part of that. Our humanitarian partners on the ground report several hundred thousand inhabitants of the camp fled to other locations. Some residents have been living in Zamzam since the beginning of the Darfur conflict in 2003. And this is the camp where, as we've told you repeatedly, famine conditions have been reported since last August. So as you can imagine, the situation is indeed very dire for these people. In recent days, artillery shelling of El Fasher, including in Abu Shuk camp, in Daraja Wula areas, has reportedly caused dozens of further civilian casualties. The massive influx of displaced people into host communities and towns where needs are already high is creating a critical pressure on health services, water infrastructure, and local food systems throughout North Darfur. We and our humanitarian partners are scaling up operations to meet the deepening needs across multiple areas of that state. However, the scale of the displacement, coupled with insecurity and rising logistic constraints, have impeded humanitarian access. The displacement are severely stretching the capacity to respond. Despite these and other challenges, our humanitarian colleagues are working with partners to coordinate the movement of an aid convoy to North Darfur in coming days that will be carrying assistance for up to 40,000 people. This will be a cross-border mission via the Adre crossing from Chad, traveling to Jenaina in West Darfur before reaching Tawila in North Darfur. We're also working with all stakeholders to try to open up sustained access for relief supplies and personnel movements into the area. In El Fasher, local NGOs are running mobile health clinics and nutrition clinics and have also launched a water trucking project providing 20 cubic meters of water daily to about 10,000 people. The Sudan Humanitarian Fund, which is managed by OCHA, is supporting the work of 6 NGO partners in and around El Fasher. And in light of the crisis in Zamzam and El Fasher, UN agencies and NGO partners are currently reviewing and adjusting response priorities in the area within the framework of the 2025 Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan. We and our humanitarian partners continue to call on all parties to uphold international humanitarian law and to ensure safe passage for civilians and guarantee and facilitate unimpeded humanitarian access. Heading slightly southeast to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, our humanitarian colleagues there warn that children continue to face grave violations of their rights as fighting persists in the east. In South Kivu province, local armed groups have forced at least 9 girls into marriages in Kalehe since February. According to local partners, many other incidents of child marriage may be going unreported. Our partners also warn that armed groups continue to recruit as child fighters. Children are also missing out on school in parts of South Kivu and Tanganyika provinces, where authorities have reported the occupation of at least 5 schools by armed groups, which is obviously disrupting the ability of children to actually attend class. In North Kivu, colleagues found nearly 9,000 displaced people living in some 50 collective centers around the provincial capital of Goma and in the town of Sake in hopes of returning to their homes in Masisi, in Nyiragongo and Rutshuru territories. OCHA is working with our humanitarian partners to address these issues and help enable safe and voluntary returns. Also today, several UN officials warned that the conflict in the country is having a dramatic impact on women and children, including risks of conflict-related sexual violence on displaced people. And on the peacekeeping front, our blue helmets from the peacekeeping mission, MONUSCO, tell us that yesterday they conducted a long-range mission to a village in Ituri province, which is 14 kilometers northeast of the peacekeepers' temporary operating base in Bayou. This long-range patrol, which follows an attack by the Codeco armed group on April 19th, seeks to promote security for local farmers during the cultivation season. It also enabled the peacekeepers to better assess the conditions on the ground. The mission engaged with local farmers who raised concerns about continued insecurity and called for more frequent patrols and the deployment of troops from the Congolese armed forces to support the safe return of internally displaced people. And in Somalia, our colleagues there are telling us that deadly flash floods have impacted nearly 30,000 people in different parts of the country. Authorities say at least 4 people have been killed in the past week, including 3 children. Our humanitarian colleagues note that the rains come after months of extreme dry conditions that decimated water sources and grazing land, straining livelihoods and forcing scores of pastoralist families to abandon their villages. Following a delayed start to the April to June wet season, the rains have been particularly heavy in Puntland and southwest states. Authorities in Somalia are appealing for assistance, especially emergency shelter, restoration of sanitation facilities, food assistance, and relocation for impacted people. We, along with our humanitarian partners, have started assessments to determine the impact of the disaster and to mobilize a response. But these efforts are concerned by extremely limited resources due to funding cuts. Our colleagues at the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warned that humanitarian needs are rising in Somalia at a time when aid agencies are having to reduce and even suspend assistance due to dwindling resources. This year, about 1/3 of Somalia's population, nearly 6 million people, needs humanitarian assistance. However, our $1.42 billion appeal is just 10% funded, with only $143 million received to date. And moving to Europe and Ukraine, our colleagues at our humanitarian affairs on the ground are telling us that Ukrainian authorities said yesterday and in the early hours of today there were drone and glide bomb attacks that struck densely populated areas throughout the country, while the fighting claimed the lives of civilians in frontline regions. In Zaporizhzhia, a glide bomb strike yesterday killed and injured people, including children. That's what local authorities are telling us. Several apartment buildings were damaged. Despite being near the front lines, the city remains home to some 630,000 people, including many displaced from other regions where fighting has been raging. Authorities also report overnight drone strikes in Dnipro, Donetsk, Kharkiv, Kherson, Poltava, and Odessa. Those have been damaging homes, warehouses, a hospital, and critical energy infrastructure. We, along with our humanitarian partners, including national NGOs, are providing emergency aid, complementing the work of state responders. Impacted communities are receiving hot meals, construction materials, and other critical items, as well as psychosocial support. And just to read into the record that yesterday we told you the Secretary General strongly condemned the armed attack in Jammu and Kashmir that took place on 22nd April, in which at least 28 people were reportedly killed. The Secretary General offers his heartfelt condolences to the bereaved families of the victims, and he stresses that attacks against civilians are unacceptable under any circumstances. Couple of international days. Today is World Book and Copyright Day. So read, but don't copy without paying, I guess. Not only do books entertain us, but they also reflect the linguistic diversity of the world, which leads me to 2 more international days. We honor 2 of our official languages today, neither of them that I can master fluently. English, yes, and Spanish. Thank you. Today is English Language Day. It is also Spanish Language Day. How do you say question in English? Any questions? Yes, first out of the gate. Linda.
Thank you, Steph. I was wondering if the SG has any response to the statements by Abbas
By?
regarding the Palestinian, reminding Hamas.
By Hamas?
Yeah. No, about Hamas, Abbas.
Okay,
Mahmoud
what did, sorry, you have to, okay, what was?
I thought you know everything.
I know everything, but I need you to say it for the record.
Okay. Well, it seems that Palestinian Authority leader Abbas has called on Hamas to disarm, give up its weapons. Is that?
Look, I think our stand is clear, is that, first of all, the Palestinian Authority is the authority we recognize over all of the Palestinian territory, that we want the Palestinians to be able to choose their own path forward. And what we want to see immediately is a return to the cessation of hostilities in Gaza to enable humanitarian aid to flow back in like it was during the time that we had a ceasefire, that we want to see the hostages released, and we want to see a return to a path of a two-state solution where Israelis and Palestinians can live in security and peace side by side. Gabriel Nanidi.
Thank you, Steph. I know you sent out a statement yesterday about the armed attack in Kashmir, but how concerned is the Secretary General that this could lead into more tensions that are already there and potential cross-border conflict, given the tense situation?
I think, listen, we're not going to predict or analyze what may happen. I think we're just looking at that incident, right? That horrific terror attack in which more than 20 people were killed, which we strongly condemn. But I will leave it to analysts as to what, if that would lead to a rise in tensions.
On Gaza, more than 35 have been killed, 105 injured in the last 24 hours. And according to the Ministry of Health officials there are still at least 6 people trapped under the rubble. Is it still the assessment by the UN that there are many trapped under the rubble, and that there is not enough material or equipment that you have access to help those people?
I mean, that is clear. We of course don't have the humanitarian aid that we need. There's not enough equipment, and there's not enough fuel to run the equipment that is actually there. And it is extremely challenging to try to find people who hopefully survived in those conditions. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. On Mr. Lamamra's visit, does his visit have the backing of the African Union, of regional groups, of others, I believe, like Qatar, who've been trying to mediate? And I ask this because as you know, one of the great problems in trying to resolve this conflict has been a series of disparate attempts.
I would not contradict your analysis. I can't say, it's not for me to speak for the African Union or others, but I can tell you that Mr. Lamamra and his team work extremely closely with the African Union, with IGAD, and other and member states in the region and beyond. He represents the Secretary General, who represents the United Nations, and we hope that every organization and member state fully back and work closely with him. Sirife, then we'll go back to the AP.
Thank you. Stéphane, there are reports that during the meeting of the Security Cabinet, Israeli Defense Minister Katz said that aid in Gaza will be distributed either by the IDF or American companies. I'd like to know initially if this will affect UN aid operations, and additionally, considering the complicity of the IDF and the US in general to the devastation in Gaza, how do you think this will impact aid distribution in Gaza?
I read a lot of interesting articles of leaks from this from the meeting you referred to, but we weren't there, obviously, so I can't speak to the veracity of what was reported. What I can tell you is, whether it's in Gaza or anywhere else in the world, the UN's humanitarian operations will only work based on our principles of humanity, of impartiality, and of independence.
The U.S. State Department announced a major reorganization yesterday, cutting many bureaus, both domestically and internationally. Has the UN Secretary General heard from U.S. counterparts about what impact their reorganization at all will have on services or funding to the UN?
No, I mean, we have not. I mean, we've seen the Bureau of International Organization will remain, but we have not had any contact at that level to see how that may impact us. Okay, any questions online? I wish you and bid you all a good day. Thank you for coming for this exciting briefing. Season tickets, yeah, exactly.